Well, good afternoon. Welcome to Reversing Diabetes. We are a Facebook group devoted specifically to the concept of using nutrition to reverse our diabetes. This group is an amazing resource and a terrific educational tool for our members to use to lower glucose to normal levels. We use a very specific nutrition plan. So make sure you refer to the pinned post and our rules for posting, commenting, and just our basic guidelines to make sure you follow the rules. I am Jenny Gallagher, and I welcome you to our group this afternoon. I am a family nurse practitioner. I've been eating this way for almost 6 years, and I now use this eating plan to help patients. So first off, let me say that normally I do some Facebook Lives on my page, but today I am specifically doing this for reversing diabetes, and I will not be reading comments or questions and taking those during this presentation because this is going to go in our pinned post to replace a video that we have been using for the past several years. First off, this is our new cover photo, and thanks to Tracy and Sandy, I absolutely love this photo. Yes, we do lose weight using our way of eating, but our goal is truly blood sugar control. Thanks to Sandy, who is the creator of this group, for asking me and inviting me to make this video specifically for you. Sandy, the other administrators, moderators, all of the other longtime mentors in the group, all want to welcome you to this group and to this video presentation. So meet Sandy. She's the group creator. I forget which year, but I think it was like 2009 or 10 when she actually started this group. She has graciously asked me to provide this information to you in this video format so that you have plenty of information and can watch this over and over again as many times as you need to help guide your journey to better health. Thanks, Sandy, for inviting me to do this. So in this approximately 50-minute to 60-minute presentation, we're going to talk about how this group came to exist and how we use food to actually heal. Thousands of us are reversing our diabetes worldwide. Originally, this kind of idea, this way of eating, was taught by people like Dr. Robert Atkins, Dr. Ron Rosedale, Dr. Richard Bernstein, Dr. Eric Westman, Steve Finney, Jeff Folick, and Dr. Sarah Holberg. Many of these low-carb experts have published a wide variety of books, videos, blogs, YouTubes, all sorts of information to help spread the word about how effective our low-carb way of eating is at reversing diabetes and weight loss. But many of these resources get costly. If you keep buying book after book or subscribing to different resources, it can get pretty pricey. So we are here for this purpose and for free. We want to provide these resources to people so that you can obtain the information and view it, use it to help you reverse your diabetes at a substantial cost savings to you. So let's look back in history a little bit. Back in the early 20th century, like 1915, 1917, diabetes had no drugs or medicine. Nothing existed to prescribe to patients. Providers, you can see this is from a book from years ago by Rebecca Oppenheimer, who published this work called Diabetic Cookery. She published this information to help providers, physicians understand that if we eliminated these kinds of foods, look, sugar's at the top, rice, sweets, if we eliminated this, then diabetic patients back in that time period would have much better control over their glucose levels. This method worked pretty well when patients followed the plan. It was a little more challenging for type 1s because they actually had no pancreas. But for type 2s, this was quite beneficial, and for type 1s, it helped. But nothing could actually fix the problem back then. Only with when we introduced medicine and drugs a few years later did the plans change, and providers were able to start using medication, and then patients began to add more carbs back into their diet. And then in 1980, we had such a point that we can go back to in time that diabetes began to become more rampant and more epidemic, because guidelines were introduced that said you should have all these grains and all these starches, but we now realize that didn't help much. Right now, for example, about half of all Americans are being diagnosed with prediabetes and or diabetes, and 2/3 of Americans are overweight, and that includes our children. You can find similar statistics in countries worldwide. So then the ADA comes along, the American Diabetes Association came along and started publishing dietary guidelines for people who have diabetes. Originally, the diet guidelines were just general for the massive population. But then the ADA comes along and they start introducing these different guidelines. When you really look at them, they're not that different. But we followed. Providers followed, consumers followed, media followed. We all just fell in line with these new guidelines. But with the advent of the internet, as internet gained popularity and more people gained access to internet information, more and more information got out. More and more information was available to people. People began doing their own research. What we call N equals 1, meaning a study participant is usually referred to as an N, meaning the number of participants in the study. So we've been doing our N equals 1 experiments on ourselves for the past probably 20 years since this has become more and more popular. The problem is now, with all of the information and all of the internet, it's really beginning to be very difficult to find who to believe, what to trust, and so it's really hard to sort the truth from fiction, or the wheat from the chaff, if you understand what I'm saying. We've always thought we could trust our providers. We thought we could trust the government guidelines. We thought we could trust nutritionists and dietitians. We thought we could trust all these people, but we're having trouble with that now because more and more information is available that contradicts what we've been learning. So here in this video today, and over the last 6 years, we've gathered lots of information that I'm going to show you. We have a variety of low carb experts that we've used, and I've mentioned some of them to you before. We've created, Sandy has done most of this work herself, has created most of the information toward this reversing diabetes low carb diet. And we like to call it a way of eating rather than a diet, but it's designed specifically to lower glucose, A1C levels, cholesterol, blood pressure, and to reverse kidney disease, all of which are pretty common complications of high blood sugars and diabetes. This group and this video is to help you see how you can stop this happening to you. So one of the first things you need to understand right off the bat with what we're talking about today is that our low carb, high fat, or healthy fat, whichever way you prefer to call it, is very different from the standard American diet, or SAD. I will refer to the standard American diet several times throughout this presentation. But we don't eat according to that guideline, and we don't use the ADA or the American Diabetes diet either. What we use is completely and totally separate and different. So let's start with a simple look and basic review of how our bodies metabolize and use food. There are three basic macronutrients: carbohydrates or carbs, I will call them carbs frequently throughout today's presentation, proteins, mostly our meat, and fats, mostly oils and butters. Carbohydrates convert directly into glucose while they're still in our mouth. While we're chewing, the enzymes, our saliva, begin to break down those simple carbohydrates into simple sugars like glucose, sucrose, fructose, and we swallow the pure and simple sugar. This sugar, these glucose molecules, are used to provide instant energy for the body. Proteins, our meat sources, are converted into amino acids. Amino acids are what we refer to as the body's building blocks. When you are growing in height and stature as a child to adult, the body requires lots of protein to be able to make the new cells to help you grow and get taller and bigger and stronger. So proteins are totally essential. Fats are used for energy as well. However, when sugars are in the blood, the body will choose to use the simplest energy source, and that's glucose. So fats are used for other tasks when that happens, and sometimes it's stored. So where does all the glucose go? If we're eating all these starches and we're eating all this stuff according to the guidelines, and all of the grains and starches are going in the system, where does all the glucose go? Well, if you look at this chart, you'll see that there are three processes. One is the instant energy we just talked about, but two other processes are used by the body to move glucose out of the bloodstream. Lots of glucose does not belong in the bloodstream. The insulin comes along and starts moving it out into fat cells, and then the other glucose is actually shunted to the liver for the liver to process and either store it as glycogen for later energy, or it's utilized to create chains of fatty acids that we recognize as triglycerides. So when we constantly bombard our bodies with hundreds of grams of sugars and carbohydrates per day, we stress our organs. The liver, the heart, the kidneys, the brain, all of these organs become very taxed and stressed, and this results in a variety of metabolic disease like diabetes and insulin resistance. So now that we've had our little physiology lesson, and that's kind of out of the way, let's get down to how we really eat and what we do to stop those processes from causing us to be sick and overweight. The simplest version, we use no sugars, no starches, no grains. We get very limited carbohydrates in our green veggies. We've taken it back to the basics. We eat meat, limited vegetables, and healthy fats. Eating this way limits the carb impact and the glucose load on our bodies. It forces our bodies to begin using fats and ketone bodies for energy instead of glucose. Ketone bodies are derived from fats. They're simpler chains, molecules of fat than the long chains that we consume. But these ketone bodies are actually the preferred energy source for most parts of our brain. So it really makes sense that the current low-fat guidelines are beginning to be blamed for some of our mental health disorders. When our brain is starving for adequate fat intake and ketone bodies, and we don't put that in the system breaks down. And so a lot of these mental health disorders were non-existent 60 to 80 years ago when we did consume higher fat intake. So let's talk about a few examples of high carb foods. Let's take rice. Rice is very popular. Lots of cultures focus on rice at every meal. But just take a look at one small bowl, about a cup of steamed white rice will convert into 13 to 15 teaspoons of sugar. That's a lot of sugar. One cup of rice contains about 45 grams of carbohydrates, and that's what it's going to convert into depending on how much you cook and how much you consume. A lot of times rice is encouraged, like on a plant-based diet. A lot of rice is encouraged because of its protein intake. However, in this one bowl of steamed white rice, there's only 4 to 5 grams of protein. Let's weigh the risk versus benefit here. We have 45 grams of carbohydrates and 4 grams of protein. I'm not seeing that that's a risk-benefit ratio that's helpful to most of us. You'll take 1 slice of bread, or this is 2 slices. It's going to convert to about 7 teaspoons of sugar, because that contains anywhere from 12 to 20 grams of carbs, depending on the brand and how thick or large the slice is. But you can see some of these other items. It's just baffling to me. So when you think about the fact that the bloodstream only needs about 4 or 5 grams, that's approximately 1 teaspoon. 1 teaspoon of sugar needs to be in your bloodstream at any given time of the day. And so we don't need 6 teaspoons of glucose coming in an orange, along with the slices of bread we're going to have with our sandwich, and then our banana, and then our glass of milk. You start adding up all of that sugar, and that's a lot of sugar to dump in the bloodstream all at once. A couple of other interesting numbers that a lot of people find baffling and shocking is, let's take 1 grab bag of chips. Whatever chip you prefer, take a look at the ingredient label and the nutrition label. Many of them are about 40 grams of carbohydrates per bag. Might say 20 grams per serving, but if you eat the whole bag, you're going to get 40 grams. That 40 grams of carbohydrate will convert to about 10 or 12 teaspoons of sugar, and that 10 or 12 teaspoons of sugar can cause your glucose to go up as much as 160 points. That's a lot. Another set of numbers that people find interesting: 1 can of soda. I won't use a brand, but 1 can of soda can contain 35 to 40 grams of carbohydrates per can. That's 8 to 12 teaspoons of sugar again. And so that 1 can of soda, I almost said a word, can raise your glucose up to 140 to 150 points just from drinking the 1 can of soda. A sandwich made with whole grain bread can raise your glucose about 80 points, depending on what you put on your sandwich. Some people will say, okay, well, I'll just switch to tortillas and wraps because they're thinner and healthier. Well, look at the nutrition label, because most tortillas and wraps actually contain twice the amount of carb as bread, because bread is mostly air. And so when you condense that and roll all that flour together, you significantly increase the concentration of the carb content in that wrap. So that one simple fact, the carb count comparison that we just talked about, makes the entire calories in, calories out theory pretty irrelevant and totally false. If it were useful, then a calorie would be a calorie. It wouldn't matter what you put in. But as we just looked at the meal with the sandwich, the orange, the banana, and the milk, that's too many carbs for one meal, yet there are loads of healthy calories, but there's almost no nutrition once you start adding that all up. So we're going to talk about a few basic tips for starting. Basically, you start with no sugar, no starch, no potatoes, no rice, no corn, no beans, no bread, no cereal, no chips, not anything made from a grain. I know all those whole grains are supposed to be so healthy for us, but they're not. Not even oatmeal. Eat real food. Think back to the farm. Think 100 years ago when most people ate their food from the farm. We eat real meat, real veggies, real fish, real eggs, real cheese. Here's a couple of practical tips to go by. First, we want you to learn to listen to your body. How many of you actually know what true physical hunger feels like? Many of us today don't. We eat by a clock. We eat out of habit. We eat because it's there. We eat because everybody else in the room is eating. We don't truly understand what real hunger is all about. And so it's really important to learn to listen to your body and to really recognize physical hunger that is a growl in the tummy, sometimes a little mild headache, and it's different than being what we call habit hungry or boredom hungry. Don't eat because you're bored. That's not good at all. That is a guarantee to overeat and eat the wrong things. Make sure to eat when you're physically hungry and not because of a schedule, a clock, boredom, or emotional need. Many of us are emotional eaters. I am an emotional eater, and it can get bad if I give in. And the good thing is, eating the way we eat, I don't have as much trouble with emotional eating because now I understand what physical hunger is and I'm able to distinguish the two. In the beginning, it might be a little bit of a challenge for you, but don't give up and hang in there and just keep making better choices all the time. Eat when you're hungry, when you're truly hungry, and stop at the very first sign you're feeling full. Don't try to eat a whole lot and don't try to eat fast. Take your time, chew your food, and really truly savor each bite and enjoy your meal. Develop a plan. If you are an emotional eater or if you eat because you're bored, what are you going to do instead when that feeling comes along? Have a plan. Know in your head, this is what I'm going to do. Some people decide to read. Some people decide I'm going to take a walk. I'm going to go for a bike ride. I'm going to call a friend. What is your plan to not give in to that craving? A lot of times in the group, we will recommend having a cup of broth, a cup of Bulletproof Coffee. Have something that is okay to consume in addition to having a plan to do something physical about to distract you from that. Okay? Come back and watch the video if you're struggling. So another big issue that we often have in reversing diabetes is all of you have your own medical providers. You see a diabetic educator, you see a nutritionist, you see a physician, you see a PA or an NP, and all of us in medicine have been trained a particular way. None of us, as a general rule, receive any nutritional training as part of our coursework. So they are not going to buy into what you're telling them. They're not going to buy into my video. They are not going to buy into this low-carb, grain-free, sugar-free eating plan because it goes against everything we've been taught. And so, first of all, be patient with them. They don't understand, and if you handle this carefully, you can actually teach them, train them, and help them help other people at some point in time. So it really is important to think about some of the words you use when you talk to your provider. Sometimes admins in the group, Rory and Tracy, Maida, I can't name them all, but sometimes we will offer advice when you're talking to your provider, and many of us will say, don't use the word keto, and you're going to find out why in just a moment. But train your providers slowly and carefully, approach topics gently, help them understand that they only learned one way and that there are other ways to help manage illness without necessarily depending on pills. Don't focus so much on cholesterol levels. That's one of the biggest questions we get in this group. Is if I am eating all this fat, is my cholesterol going to go up? But there's no evidence that cholesterol has ever contributed to heart disease or clogged arteries at all. We have a huge section of links, blogs, and several posts that we repeatedly tag people in that has lots of information about cholesterol, statins, triglycerides, and the HDL levels. So, one of the first things we like to warn people about is carb flu or keto flu. When we cut sugars and grains out, and we've been eating hundreds of grams of them a day, it impacts our bloodstream and our bodies. And many of us have an addiction to sugar. And so it comes out when you cut those things out of your lifestyle. And so oftentimes people will experience a sugar withdrawal and suffer with headaches, feeling tired, having muscle cramps, leg cramps, even feeling bloated and constipated. Be prepared to face these symptoms and deal with them. These are some tips. Usually it only lasts during the first week or two. Usually between day 4 and 8 or 9 is the worst. So if you know that ahead of time and you're planning to start May 1st or September 1st or whatever, then you can maybe plan to be at home on the weekend during most of that time period where the carb flu or keto flu might hit. Have plenty of salty, buttery broth on hand. Many of us make bone broth by soaking leftover bones from our chickens or steaks or whatever. We soak those in the crock pot on low to medium heat for a couple days and then season it to taste. And so we sip on bone broth or Bulletproof Coffee. Some forms of magnesium can help with these crampings and with constipation, but some of these forms aren't healthy to use on a routine daily basis. And so if you need help figuring out what magnesium to use, we have lots of posts about that in the group as well, and we can talk to you some more. But these are some tips to help you get through that initial carb or keto flu. We know this way of eating is working when we realize we're not hungry. It happens. Most people will say they got started and they worked at this, and then all of a sudden one day they're plugging along at their day and it's 2:00 in the afternoon and they never stopped for lunch. And they're like, wow, that really is working. So be prepared for that. It's going to happen at some point in time. The reason that happens is when we eat fat, it helps us burn fat and it keeps us less hungry. Carbs, if you've heard any of our discussions or read anything about how carbohydrate is metabolized, you know you get a spike when you eat sugar and then it falls and bottoms out real fast because that sugar doesn't belong in the bloodstream. And so the body is working really hard to get it out of the blood fast. But that triggers hunger. When you eat lots of carbs and you keep getting hungry, it's because the carbohydrate energy is being pulled out of the bloodstream really fast. So eating this way will cause a little bit of discomfort these first few days, but it works. And then we start snacking less often. We eat less overall. We have fewer cravings. And so the best advice I can give you is this too shall pass. So one of the things that we deal with a lot is, what do I do about my medicine? Well, number one, we can't tell you that. We're not your provider. I'm a medical provider, but I'm not your medical provider. And so I can't tell you what to do with your medication. I can give you some advice and tell you about your medicine, but we can't be responsible or liable. You have to learn to make your own decisions and own choices. if we are telling you that using your diet, the low carb diet, and your insulin, and we're telling you it is unsafe, we truly mean it is unsafe. Low carb is just as effective as any medication, including insulin, at lowering glucose. So when you use our low carb way of eating and you use insulin to do the same thing, you do run the risk of significantly low glucose levels. So you have to be ready, willing, and able to reduce, stop, or call your provider and figure out what's going on. If you can't get a hold of your provider, then you have to do what the safest thing is for you, and only you can make that choice. So be sure you're aware. Most of us are not licensed healthcare providers, and so most of us provide advice based on our own experience and what we did when we took our medicine and when we went low carb. Like I've mentioned before, most providers have no idea that when you cut down to 20 grams of carbs per day, the glucose drops drastically. Usually within a few days, you will see significantly lower glucose levels. They've never seen anybody be able to do this before, ever. Diabetes has never been reversible. It's always been considered progressive. And so the providers don't have any understanding that cutting the carbs will drop the glucose. They've been told it's the fat causing the problem, so that in their mind, it's two different streets. They are on two different wavelengths, and they're not grasping what you're saying. Even when you take your glucose readings and it shows a steady decline, they're not grasping it. They don't understand. So it takes time. But it is your responsibility to also make sure that you know the effects of your medicine. If you are prescribed a medication, you need to know how it works. You need to know its side effects. You need to look up and know exactly what to expect out of this medication, so that when you add that medicine to your low carb way of eating, you will be ready and able to manage that information. Healthcare providers like Dr. Westman, Dr. Sarah Hallberg, all of the experts who we have gleaned information from and assembled here in this group, most of us as licensed healthcare providers that understand low carb nutrition for diabetes control fully understand that it is vital to drop medicine levels immediately. The first day you start low carb, we providers usually say, cut your insulin in half, cut your glipizide in half, whatever medicine you're using. We will generally instruct people to start the day one with half the medicine. That's how effective our way of eating is. It's really effective. And so it's really important for you to be aware that what providers do that use low carb is they usually start with a half dose or a 3/4 dose in some cases. And they teach patients right away, right off the bat, this is when you decrease, this is when you decrease, this is when you decrease, this is when you hold steady. So all of that information is important. And if you don't have a provider that understands, then it's going to be left up to you to figure out how to dose that medicine most safely and most effectively. One thing that we will tell you repeatedly in the group is that metformin does not directly lower glucose. So if you are only on metformin, it works in the liver. It does not work in the bloodstream to drop glucose. So some people are more sensitive to medicine than others, and so some people rarely will have a lower glucose because of metformin. That's not the general rule. Metformin will, however, work to lower glucose in combination with certain glucose lowering drugs. For instance, if you're on insulin and metformin is added or vice versa, then you may see a slight drop in glucose, a sudden drop because of the combination of the two. It's not that one is doing more than the other, it's just how some medicines work synergistically together. So I hope that makes sense. Okay. My personal preference about metformin use is that it is a good, quality, safe, helpful medication. It's old time. It's been around many years. It has a tried and true safety record. Yes, it comes with side effects, and yes, some of them can be significant, but those are generally pretty rare. In all of my years of practicing as a nurse and nurse practitioner, I have only ever seen one serious side effect of metformin, one out of the hundreds of patients that I've counseled and seen. So the serious side effects are really rare, and I use it a lot. I prescribe it almost every day to someone. So if you're debating and on the fence, just remember it doesn't directly lower glucose. It works in the liver to help improve insulin resistance, which is the biggest problem most of us have. One other note about metformin, I usually keep my patients on metformin until their A1C stays around the 5 mark, somewhere between 4.5 and 5.5 consistently for 6 or 8 months. Why? Because it doesn't directly lower glucose, and it improves insulin resistance because of what it does in the liver. So it's really helpful to stay on that for longer periods of time than it is some of the other medications. My daddy, if any of you have seen my video or read any of my articles about my daddy, you know that my daddy belonged to the Clean Your Plate Club. You could eat off of his plates just like these when he would finish a meal. So that is one thing we do not advise you belong to. Do not try to clean your plate at every meal. Start learning to leave a bite or two. Leave something on your plate, because belonging to the Clean Your Plate Club is guaranteed to make us overeat most of the time, especially in the beginning. So think about that as you fix plates and eat. You do have the choice to either trash the leftover food or to store it on your waste. I call it waste or waste. And so where do you prefer that extra food go? Do you want it stored on your waste, which is going to increase your risk of heart disease? Or do you just want to waste it? Or even save it and put it in the fridge? That's usually what I do. So what does a low carb, high fat, or healthy fat plate look like? That's pretty close. If any of you ever look at our daily food thread, many of us will post our pictures and recipes that we find in that thread. And so a lot of times you'll see just like this, a small piece of meat and a small side of veggie, and then you can see it's got a little bit of fat running off of the chicken breast, the asparagus, and the onions. And so this is what it looks like. During the first 4 to 6 weeks, keep your portions small, but don't stress about it. Don't freak out, and you don't have to measure anything those first few weeks. The first thing we want you to learn is the food list. Learn what to eat, learn how to cook, learn how to add some extra fat, learn how to cook in butter. Most of us have not been cooking in butter for years. We haven't cooked in bacon grease for 20 or 30, 40, 50 years now. So just start with the basics and learn how to eat and how to cook this way. Eventually, you can find Rory's post or my post about the keto calculator, and you can calculate your specific macronutrient goals, so you'll know exactly how many carbs, proteins, and fats your specific body needs for its activity level and function. But for now, you're just starting. This is the beginning, and we want you to really focus on the what rather than the how much, okay? As you fix your meals and you have questions about your plate, take pictures and put them on our daily food thread. Say, does this look like a good meal today? Am I getting this sort of right? If you find a recipe and you have made it and you think, wow, this looks compliant with reversing diabetes, I'm going to share this. You put it on that daily food thread. The different admins, Bianca usually posts it, but different admins post it really late at night for the next 24 hours. And so you can search the group for the daily food thread and find tons and tons of recipes that are posted there. So we're going to talk about what we do eat. We've talked about some of the things we don't eat, and we talked about what this plate should look like. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what we do eat. This list that we're going to talk about in this video is not comprehensive. Our food list is not comprehensive, but it's even bigger than this. But it does give you a great place to start. Remember that in some cultures, there are other foods available we've never heard of. Putting this slide presentation and our food list together. But you can Google nutrition information on any food from anywhere and you'll find it. We also recommend using an app, and there's a bunch of them. When we first started, there were only a handful of apps for tracking macronutrient intake, but now there's bunches and bunches. I used to be familiar with the top 3 or 4, and now there's so many I don't even know what they're called anymore. So use the apps. If you have trouble using the app or not knowing how to use the app, there are YouTube videos for almost everyone out there. So just go to YouTube and search the name of your app, and you will find a how-to video for that. We have some of the information in the group, but not the videos on how to use each one. So let's talk about meat. Number 1, red meat's bad, right? That's what we've been told for 50 years. Nope. Red meat is actually very good for you. Red meat has almost 100% of all the nutrients we need in a day. The only thing red meat does not contain is vitamin C. So any meat is fine, even hot dog, sausage, and bacon. Chicken, turkey, duck, tuna, shrimp, seafood, scallions, crab. Just be careful with some of the crab and seafood products. Many of them are stuffed or imitation, and those can be loaded with wheat, corn syrup, lots of chemicals and sugars. So just be really careful with that. Processed meats are available and acceptable to use on our way of eating, but you do want to read labels. Many hot dogs, for instance, many lunch meats do have added corn syrup, brown sugar, different kinds of sweeteners added. So just look at the labels and be very careful. The one thing we do want to mention, many members of Reversing Diabetes do try to eat clean, organic. But as administrators, moderators, and me as a medical provider, we realize that that's not practical for everyone. And so we don't encourage that. We don't support that as an only way to work. If you can afford organic, if you can afford the less processed and the more clean and natural type meats and foods, fine. But it's certainly not required to be able to eat this way. So I buy some organic and I buy some not organic because it's just what I have access to and can afford. So just a caution, I would encourage members to support each other in whatever they're able to buy. Sometimes it's easy on a computer and to type or say things that aren't quite as kind because we think we're educating and we're teaching. So just be thoughtful in the way you say things sometimes. Sometimes it can come across and hurt people's feelings, and we really don't want that to happen because then members often leave or get upset. So if you eat clean, great, but it's not a requirement for eating this way. Bacon is a low-carb favorite. We eat bacon at my house every day. We sometimes will fry up a batch to top things with as we make things during the week, so it's already made and we don't have to make more. We also save our bacon grease in a jar. We'll pour it off out of the pan once we've cooked the bacon, and we save it in a jar, and then you can use the bacon grease to cook other foods in. But bacon is a great way to add just a tiny bit of protein and fat at the end of the day if your macros aren't quite right later on, or if you're just a little bit hungry before you go to bed, grab a piece of fried up bacon and have that. As far as vegetables, most of our veggies are green. You'll see a few colors here, but most of them are pretty green. We eat all the non-starchy vegetables. Remember, our food list is in the pinned post. I'll name a few of the approved foods: artichokes, asparagus, avocado, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, chives, cabbage, cauliflower, celery, cucumber, eggplant, greens. Green beans are allowed. Green onions and scallions, kelp noodles, lettuces of all kinds, mushrooms, okra, but not breaded okra, onions, parsley, peppers, pickles, radishes, rhubarb, rutabaga, snow peas, spinach, sprouts, whole sugar snap peas, zucchini, tomatoes, turnips, and wax beans. That's just the most common, and that's from the shopping list that we have in our pin post. There are lots of other approved veggies. If you're not sure, then Google the nutrition information or look in your app. This is a major problem for people because corn is always served in restaurants as a vegetable, right? But it's not a vegetable. We actually feed corn to our farm animals to fatten them up. That's exactly why they're fed that. What do you think it's doing to us? So corn is not a veggie, it's a grain, and it is not that healthy for us, okay? A couple of things, when I named off a couple of the veggies, the beans and the peas that are on the approved list are on there because the bean and the pea inside the shell is so tiny that it's low carb. Other beans like kidney beans, pinto beans, lima beans, they're big beans and there's no shell included, and so they are much higher carb. So keep that in mind. Keep in mind also that avocado is kind of high in carbs. So keep the amount small when you do have avocado, but avocado is a terrific and healthy fat, loaded with nutrition. So it's really good for us if you like them or if you can tolerate them. I didn't used to like them till I started eating this way. So gradually over time, I've grown to like it and use it even plain. Tomatoes are also kind of high in carbs. So be very careful. If you're in doubt about whether a food is good for you or not, test before and after you eat it. You'll know right then. This is the one that probably we get the biggest arguments about with other people when we start sharing our way of eating. Because fruits are so healthy for you, right? They're colorful, right? Well, they may have a little nutrition, but today's fruits aren't nearly as healthy as fruits were 100 years ago. So think about that, and remember that all of the fruit, all of the sugar in the fruit is going to turn to sugar in the bloodstream. And so fruits are not generally recommended. Now, after you have normal and stable glucose and your medicine is stabilized and you're off of most of it, and your glucose levels are running normal, some people will add in a few occasional berries like blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, because berries are really good antioxidants, meaning they're helpful at removing some of the inflammatory processes and markers within the body, and they're lower in sugar than all the other fruits. So if you're in doubt, always look it up. But you can always use Google or your app to find out how much carbohydrate is in a food. So what do we drink? Well, we've been told to drink milk, right? Well, yeah, not so much. Milk is pretty high in carbs. In fact, skim milk, low-fat milk, and whole milk all have about the same amount of carbohydrates, no matter which kind, because all they take out is the fat. And so that does not affect the glucose or lactose level in the milk. However, keep in mind too, only little bitty kids need milk. Once we've been weaned and we're growing and we're older kids, we don't need milk every day. It's totally unnecessary if we're getting our veggies, especially our green veggies, because lots of calcium is in our vegetables that we eat. Stay away from alcohol, especially beer, and the sweet cocktails, because they're all going to be converted into glucose. Most alcohol is made from grains like barley and wheat, or malt, and so all of that is going to break down into glucose. You can see different drinks here. This Red Bull has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It will convert into 7 teaspoons of glucose when you drink one Red Bull. If you have one vitamin water, a lot of people think vitamin water is extremely healthy. You're winding up with 8 teaspoons of glucose in that bottle of vitamin water. And some of the bottles actually contain 2 or 3 servings per bottle. And so the nutrition information provided on that label is per serving, not per bottle. So if you're per serving, let's just pretend for a moment, what if this is 8 teaspoons per half a bottle and you drink the whole bottle? You got 16 teaspoons of sugar, not 8. So label reading is extremely important on our way of eating. So you want to make sure and keep up with that. Caffeine is allowed, and many of us will drink Bulletproof Coffee or Bulletproof Tea, and that just means that we're having coffee with added fat. We might put butter and or coconut oil and or heavy cream and or unsweetened other types of milks, just to make sure there are no added sugars and that the carb count is extremely low, because the carbs add up really, really fast. Most of us on low carb do drink a lot of water. It's vital for all of the cells in our body to stay hydrated. Other approved beverages might include bone broth. We've talked about that. Clear broth like chicken or vegetable broth. Beef broth is fine. Bouillon can be okay. You just want to read the label on the bouillon container and make sure they're not putting any sugars in the bouillon. Most tea is okay. Unsweetened herbal teas can be okay. Be very careful with some of the flavored coffees and teas though, because some of the natural flavorings as listed on the label actually contain some sugars or honey, brown sugar, other kind of sweeteners to make that flavor come out and to be noticed. Bulletproof coffee I mentioned. Unsweetened seltzer water can be used. It's usually found on the mixed drink aisle in stores. You can add lemon and lime juice to flavor your water. Some people will use some of the commercial products that have flavoring for water, but be very careful because lots of additives and things are often in there as well. We don't encourage people to drink shakes or to drink their calories. The brain needs to know and sense the chewing action of your jaw. So it's not a good idea to routinely have shakes or these kinds of protein drinks or whatever. Part of the reason is the brain chewing thing. Part of the reason is they often have sweeteners in them, and they often have artificial sweeteners and lots of preservatives and other things that can tax the body. So we don't typically recommend these kinds of shakes. So what are healthy fats and oils? Well, these are some. Of course, my favorite is butter. Everything's better with butter, right? We've been told for the last 50 years that saturated fats from animals like butter and bacon grease are really unhealthy. They're the guilty culprit for heart disease and health problems. But that's not true. Saturated fats are not health hazards. They provide a myriad of nutrients for our bodies and our brains, and they help keep us satiated or satisfied for longer periods of time than carbs do, when we talked about that earlier. Healthy fats include avocado, almonds, macadamia, not almonds, almond oil, my bad. Almond oil, macadamia oil, olive oil, red palm oil, coconut oils, real butter, even beef tallow and pig lard. Schmelz is fine. And some of you may have seen my little oil quick review list. So it tells you which ones to use for which kind of baking or cooking and which kind not to use. And that can be really helpful when you're first learning all of this about which oils to use. If you're keeping it simple, butter and bacon grease. Can't go wrong with those two. You can use occasional seed and nut oils. You just want to be very careful because like sesame and flaxseed are somewhat okay, but when some of the oils are heated, they oxidize and become unhealthy. So I will add my little picture list that I've made of the different oils on this thread once we get done with the Facebook Live. But keep those amounts small when it's those kinds of oils, and on a rare occasion, because you don't want to deliberately eat lots of that and wind up with triggering more inflammation inside. But butter, olive oil, avocado oil, and bacon grease and coconut oil are my favorites. They're the ones I use every day. So we've already talked a little bit about milk, but other dairy products that you need to be careful with include yogurt and cheeses. As you can see in this picture, whole milk contains 12 grams of carbs, so does skim milk. Even 1 cup of yogurt can contain 11 grams of carbohydrates. That's going to turn to sugar. So yogurt is one of those things that we don't really recommend. Once you get stabilized, you might be able to have some on occasion. But if you have 11 grams of carbs in 1 cup of yogurt, that's half of your whole day's allowed carbohydrates in a day. Doesn't leave you much for your other meals. So it's really hard to consume a lot of dairy products. So be aware of that. We do recommend you use heavy cream, whipping cream, full fat sour cream, full fat cream cheese. Any cheese is fine. Mascarpone, cheddar, Swiss, brie, blue, mozzarella. Like almost all the cheeses are fine, but some of them do contain a few more carbs than others, and they do also contain protein and fat. So you can't say, well, I had all my protein in my cheese and didn't have enough fat. Well, how much fat was in your cheese? Did you count all that? So be very careful. Look things up. Google your nutrition information. Look things up in your app. Make sure that you're calculating those macros properly after 4 to 6 weeks when you've learned what to eat. The amounts matter later, not so much at the beginning. Keep in mind that sliced cheeses, processed cheese, the cheese in the box, those aren't typically recommended because they usually come with carbohydrates and chemicals that aren't very healthy for us. So what about condiments? Can we have mayo, mustard, ketchup? Well, here are some good ones and some high carb ones. So Hellmann's and Duke's both have very little or no added sugars, and a lot of us will use those on occasion. The biggest problem with some of the commercial oils is the type of oil they're using. They typically use soy oil, which is not one of our recommended oils, or they'll use corn oil, canola oil, or vegetable oil, all of which can trigger inflammatory processes. So I will make my own sometimes, especially in the summer when I'm going to use a lot more mayo. Through the winter, I don't use a ton of mayo, and so I will use the store-bought because it's so rare that I use it. Mustard's okay, but not honey mustard. Lemon or lime juice is fine for drizzling on fish or salads. Keep in mind that most purchased commercial salad dressings are loaded with sugar. They'll add corn syrup, sugar, all sorts of sweeteners to try to make it more appealing and make you buy it again. Some of our favorites, like poppy seed and some of the ranches, you just got to read labels. There are a few brands that are beginning to come out with less and less sugar because the demand is being made known to companies that we low carbers want something with less sugar. So there are some choices becoming available. So just read labels. Don't only read the nutrition part. Read down there in the fine print where it lists the ingredients, because sometimes the nutrition information will say 0 carbs, but then you'll see corn syrup in the list. Okay. You can use small amounts of almond flour as a binder, like to make meatloaf or to bread some chicken or something, to put it in meatballs, but try not to use almond flour and coconut flour the first several months of this way of eating, because subbing out, like if you try to make a bread or a biscuit or some sort of bun using these flours, number one, they're pricey. They get expensive. Number two, they don't feel the same, and they definitely don't taste the same. And so a lot of new low carbers in the group will go out, they'll find one of these keto recipe books or keto recipes somewhere, and they'll go and buy all this expensive flour and all these specialty ingredients, and they'll make it, and they'll be like, this doesn't even taste like bread. And it doesn't. So we typically discourage trying to find substitutes for old favorites. Just let your palate change, learn to eat the new things, eat more veggies, meats, and fats. And usually within a few months, your whole taste changes and the desire for those things falls by the wayside. I used to bake bread. So there's nobody in this group that loves bread as much as I used to. I used to bake 10 or 12 loaves a day and would sell them when I was way back when, and had little kids at home. That's what we did for fun and to raise a little money now and then. We would bake breads and sell it at church or the local farmer's market or whatever. We ate the daylight out of some sourdough bread. I love that stuff. Haven't had any in the last 6 years. Not one piece, not one slice. And so it can be done. I don't even desire it anymore. It's not worth the pain and consequences to have that in my meal anymore. So don't sub out for those old favorites. It's not good for you. So what do we do for snacks? Okay. So my favorite, well, I have a couple of favorites. I love me some deviled eggs. My husband was recently gone for a little while, and so I made a big batch of deviled eggs and kept them in the fridge, and that's what I munched on when I was just a tad bit hungry, but not hungry enough to cook a meal for one. So deviled eggs and boiled eggs make great snacks. You can keep them in their shell or take them out of their shell, put them in a baggie and take them with you wherever you go. We do use some pork rinds. Be careful with the flavored ones. Many of the flavored ones do contain carbs because the powders are sugary that they coat them in. Summer sausage is often okay. Sometimes there will be 1 gram per serving in sausages. So just read labels and be careful. Like I mentioned before, fried up bacon ahead of time, kept in the fridge is a great snack. Cheese is okay, but in small quantities because sometimes it's easy to overeat cheese. Olives are great, although I don't like them. I'm sorry. My husband loves them. We buy some of the ones that are stuffed with peppers and garlic sometimes. So he will have a snack. We make roll-ups. I call them unwitches. We take lunch meat, low-carb lunch meat without corn syrup added, and spread it out and spread a little cream cheese and maybe stick a green onion stalk or a celery stalk or a piece of avocado, whatever we have at home, and then roll that up, and that's what we call an unwich or a roll-up. Makes great snacks or even hors d'oeuvres, appetizers for a party or a shower. I think my all-time favorite snack, though, for low-carb eating is to toast pepperonis. You can either lay a layer of pepperoni chips out in a skillet and fry them on top of the stove. You can stick them in the microwave, or you can stick them in the oven or toaster oven and cook them just until the edges start to brown, and then take them out and let them cool off. And then they're dippable. And so I like chips and dip just like everybody else. So my chips and dip are toasted pepperoni chips and guacamole. That's my favorite. So one little tip about snacks. Some of you will read about and have already heard about dawn phenomenon, or DP, we call it often. You'll see the abbreviation DP. We're talking about dawn phenomenon. That's where the liver is trying to help you out in the morning, or sometimes if you wind up going long periods of time in the day without eating for some unknown reason, maybe something comes up and you're not able to eat on schedule. The liver will help you by spitting out a little bit of that stored glycogen it has on hand, and that will make your glucose go up. It happens frequently first thing in the morning when you wake up and you don't eat right away. Some people just don't have an appetite to eat right away. And so that's perfectly fine. But when your liver is trying to help you out, that's not so fine. And so some people find that a small protein fatty snack late at night just before bed, like some olives or a piece of cheese or a piece of bacon, can help the body not do that as often. No matter whether you try to treat it with that snack at bedtime or just let it happen, dawn phenomenon does go away. It just takes time. The liver did not get this sick and this whacked out chemically in a few weeks. It's going to take months and sometimes a year or more for dawn phenomenon to clear. We have a huge, wonderful post about dawn phenomenon, and if you need more information about it, just let us know. So these are some things to cut out. Simple carbs. Most of these are simple carbs. A few of them are complex, but no sugar, no low fat. Don't buy anything that says it's low fat on the front of the label. That's a guarantee for likely sugar that's been added to that product. In fact, try not to buy anything with a label. I know that's kind of hard, huh? But the closer to the farm you buy, the better off you'll be. No low fat, no light, no sugar free, no white sugar, no brown sugar, no syrup, no honey, no maple syrup, no molasses, no corn syrup, no flavored yogurts, no fruit juice, no juice boxes, no fruit. Complex carbs include your grains, so none of them. Not even whole grains, no rice, no cereal, no oatmeal, no barley, no oats, no granola, no flour, no corn, no cornstarch, no breads, no pasta, no muffins. Maybe we should make this a song. No muffins made with flours. There are some low carb breakfast muffins out. They're mostly meat, eggs, and cheese with no flour added. And those are called muffins. So you just have to read ingredients and recipes to be sure you're making the right kind. No crackers, no bagels, no tortillas, no wraps, no pita bread, no beans, except the snow peas and the green beans we mentioned from before. But your pinto beans, your red beans, your split peas, all of those beans in the dry bean aisle, those are not good for us. No peas, no peanuts. Peanuts and peas and beans all belong to a family called legumes, and they are really high in carbs, and many of them can trigger inflammatory processes within. And so part of our problem isn't just the sugar or the insulin problem in our bodies. Some of us have a high rate of inflammation going on, so we don't want to add to that if we can help it. Avoid all the root veggies like potatoes, yams, sweet potatoes, carrots, parsnips, winter squash like acorn, butternut, and buttercup. Zucchini and summer squash are pretty low carb, and those are really good to use, but stay away from the winter squash. Carrots, I will say this little caveat. Many of us do make coleslaw, and we'll buy the pre-chopped kits at the store. The amount of carrots in that coleslaw mix is usually so minimal that it's not a huge impact on glucose. If you're worried about it, test before you eat it and test after you eat it. The one thing you don't want to use out of that pre-packaged coleslaw is the mix, though. It's loaded with sugar. Make your own, okay? We make our own with mayo, a lemon juice, salt and pepper, and garlic. And so we don't have to have any sweetener in it when we make it ourselves. You want to avoid cocoa, not because cocoa is bad. It's actually, cocoa in itself is a really good antioxidant and healthy for our hearts. However, how many of you can eat cocoa? Like plain? Yeah, that's not going to happen very often. So it's really hard to be able to have cocoa in an allowable amount without sweetener. So maybe later you could find a recipe that you could use some in, but we really stress none at first. Like, our goal here is to drop glucose, get better, and then as you learn what works for you, you can try your own experiment down the road to see what you can have and what you can't have. But avoid cocoa for now because it has to be sweetened some kind of way. Also, a problem for a lot of people is gum or candy, cough drops, breath mints, Tic Tacs, So all of that can run your sugars up or cause an insulin response, which triggers inflammatory processes. So if you've hung in here this long, you're doing good, but we're winding it down. So one of the things that we don't stress a lot about is artificial sweeteners. We try to avoid them and we don't recommend you use them. However, we understand some people think they need them. And so our personal stance here in Reversing Diabetes is that we don't encourage them, but we try not to condemn you for using them either. So we do ask that if you use an artificial sweetener that you not post about it, not write about it, not recommend it to other members. Sometimes, even in this conversation, I've talked about things like breads and cocoa that can be triggers for people. And so we don't want to do that deliberately and cause people to start having cravings for things that are unhealthy. And so when we continue to consume things like artificial sweeteners, we often do have cravings that continue. Artificial sweeteners, most of them are recognized by the brain in the same way that sugar, honey, or agave is recognized. And so it triggers the same response by the liver and the pancreas. So we don't typically encourage artificial sweeteners. Some people will use them, but we do ask that you not like blatantly advertise that kind of ingredient in a recipe or recommend that lots of people use those artificial sweeteners, because we don't want people struggling with that. Okay. If you have questions about an artificial sweetener, we do have a couple of really good posts about AIs, artificial sweeteners in the group. It is a personal choice, and we're not going to beat you up over using them. But one of the things I have found in counseling patients, seeing patients in clinic, is that often they'll switch to low carb. Patients will be doing great. Everything's going good until it doesn't. It may be 2 months down the road. It may be 6 months down the road. And they'll come back and they'll say, everything was going fine. What's happened? Because my sugars have stuck at 110 every morning. And I know that's not bad, but I want it better. And so after we start reviewing a food intake diary, oftentimes we find that the artificial sweetener is pretty common in their diet. And if they are at a point by that time that they can drop it, we often see significant improvements. So, thanks for watching. I hope this is very helpful for you. Feel free to post your questions. Use the search tool on a phone. The search tool is in the blue bar at the very tip top of the page. On a computer screen, it's on the far left in the blue box. You have a white screen that's most of your newsfeed content. You have this ad screen over here, and then you have this left menu bar over here that's kind of pale blue. If about halfway down the page on your computer is a search box. And so lots of this has been discussed many, many times over the past several years. Most people can't ask us a question we've not seen before. And so sometimes you can find answers without even posting. If you post a question and you don't see it in the group, get approved to be posted in the group, it oftentimes is because we're tagging you somewhere because it's already been asked before. So always check your notifications. It's the little globe either at the bottom of your computer or the bottom of your phone or the top of your computer screen. It's the little globe, and it'll have a little red number beside it. So if you've been tagged, that notification will pop up in that place, and you can scroll down through there. Oh, Jenny tagged me in a post about artificial sweeteners. So you click on that, and it'll take you right to the tag, and then you can scroll up to the top of that post, and you'll see the information that we wanted you to read. A lot of our posts, where we tag you, all the information is not in the top original posters' comments. Sometimes the important information might be in the thread in different comments down the way. Rory, Sandy, all of the admins and moderators add information to post all the time to help clarify and help people understand things. And so a lot of times it's not just that top part we want you to see or that might be helpful for you. So go through that and read all of that. Don't ever hesitate to ask a question. That's what the admins and moderators are for. Lots of other members will chime in about their experiences. Hopefully, this has provided you with a great foundation, and you'll be able to start work from here. And then as you go along your health journey to reverse your diabetes, you'll get better and better and better, and you'll navigate the group even more efficiently too. I've had a blast chatting with y'all this afternoon. I will go back through comments and questions that have been posted as I've been chatting here, and the different admins will as well, and we'll try to answer those. This video is going to get put in the tool chest with a link to it, and so whoever joins from now on, you can refer them to the pinned post and tool chest, and they'll find this video there. Be willing to share our love with low carb with everybody, and invite your friends and family that have trouble with their glucose. Let them know of this group, and that if they are interested, you would like to add them. But try not to just add lots of people without them knowing, because we talk about a lot of specific stuff, and it can be overwhelming to people that have no idea that you've added them. So always ask if you want to add people to our group. I appreciate Sandy inviting me to be here today and to share with y'all. Thanks to all of our admins and moderators. I appreciate each one of you. Let me know how I can help. I'm Jenny, and I'm signing off. See y'all later.